Joining me from Manhattan, and I hope you all can detect how stoked I am. Finally, Molly Jong-Fast, host of Fast Politics, author of How to Lose Your Mother and several other books. She's a prolific writer, contributing writer for the New York Times. Gosh, what haven't you done? How are you? Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited. It's a mutual admiration society here, so I'm happy to be here, though.
Well, let me one up you with that in the interest of full disclosure. I've always written you, Molly, and I've been on Fast Politics to tell you
Yeah.
how much I love your show. The curation, the cross section of people you get.
Oh.
I've told you this repeatedly. When Spotify pings me and says there's a new episode of Fast Politics, and you see the people who come on, or you announce it with the cast of characters, especially through the election, especially on a long drive, it feels like you're being taken care of. I've compared many of those surprise joys to, like, I don't know if you went to Burger King as a kid, but when there was an accidental onion ring in a fry,
I love
that's
an
what a
onion
new
ring.
episode, a new drop of Fast Politics feels like.
So I would say two things. One is that people do say that right after the election, people would say, I listen to it and it doesn't make me crazy the way a lot of other news makes me like really angry, even though we talk about what's going on. The other thing that I think helps it is there aren't that many podcasts that are politics that are structured that way, which is we do a roundup of the news, and then we do two different interviews, one that's more like topical, what's going on, and one that's more of a sort of centerpiecey bit of the podcast. And so what happens is you really can listen to it and pretty much know what's going on. And it also drops 4 days a week. So, and it drops on days when often there aren't other podcasts. So it's on our Sunday episode because it was Saturday. We drop an episode on Saturday. Most podcasts drop on Friday because most people don't actually want to work
It ends up
on
becoming like a full small order of onion rings in that, to
it.
extend and torture the metaphor.
It does very much. And also, we just give people what they need, I feel like, in a good way.
So I'm going to throw, in the interest of going into topics with you, and I want to get to your bio and building Molly Jong-Fast Corp, if you will, for the second half of the show. But I said this to other guests we've had on, Abigail Spanberger, David Sirota, other people I'm still mulling. If I had told you, carte blanche, 10, 12 years ago, that in election 2024, someone like an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and a Dick Cheney would vote for the same candidate. And I'd also tell you that by 2025, that person who won against the candidate who they voted for would be invading Venezuela to take out its leader, to run the place as a kind of a Petro viceroy. I don't even know what you call it. What would you have backward answered into that, looking into your crystal ball 10 years ago?
So I think the question is, did any of us see Making Colonialism Great Again? Did any of us have that on our bingo cards? And the answer, of course, is no. All of us saw it, I think. I mean, maybe there were some people who thought that he would foray into colonialism. I mean, that's really what it is, right? Going to countries that...
You can't call it mercantilism? You can't clean it up a little more? No?
Sure. Okay. I mean, that works too, right? I mean, he's going to countries that we have no claim on, taking them over and trying to strip them of their resources.
But we have a playbook for this with Manuel Noriega in 1989 and 1991, and they pointed the finger at cocaine then as well.
Right. And that was a little bit different. But this is far from my field of expertise. But what I would say is that the MAGA world had one of the ways in which it had sort of it considered itself to have a moral authority was that, and that it was better than normal republicanism, was that it rejected the sort of Middle East stuff that we saw Bush 1 and Bush 2 do. And and you would see MAGA people say things like, we don't believe in nation building. We don't believe in killing, sending your sons to die in war. We don't believe in any of that. And that was probably like one of the very few moral kind of high ground-ish elements of Trumpism, and that just went away overnight.
But you
And what
are
I
seeing them trying to do it asset light. They say no boots on the ground there. We're doing it through strategic coercion and saying that, hey, you could stay, Madam Vice President, as long as you listen to what we dictate and give us 50 million barrels of oil.
Right. Again, I don't think there's any way in which that works in the long term. Again, like if we're looking at history, we tend to do coups very well and what comes next very poorly. So, but maybe it works. I mean, I'm not a mind reader, but I do think that you're looking at an admin that has now all of a sudden completely shifted. And my question is, why would what, like, how and why and what does that look like? And I just wonder, like, you don't have to sell this at all to anyone, and I think you have to sell it to someone.
And as everyone's been calling me this week to say, and yet crude oil prices are down. They remain down. There is no, spike that every Chevron has been rallying. The stock market hit an all-time high on some sort of euphoria. None of the old, tripwires, fail-safes seem to apply here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's like the question of the tariffs, right? So we have these tariffs. They are, everyone in the world thinks they're inflationary, right? And then they're not as inflationary as we think, mostly because they're not being paid at the level Trump says they are. But I mean, that there's some question of like when this stuff happens, right? Like it's been not as good a year for the dollar.
That's right.
It has been.
And international exchanges, international companies had a gangbusters year last year versus everybody else. If you told them that this trade war would have commenced in April, then, and maybe that was because he showed his hand, maybe because it showed the world how indispensable and non-negotiable the likes of Korea and Brazil were, that they had things that they could ultimately get carved out.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real question. I don't know the answer.
That's
I think there's so much now where we're seeing, again, like the thing about Trumpism is you don't ever realize how much of what ends up giving him problems are second order effect things. So it's not the tariff, it's the trade war. It's not the coup, it's the not having a plan to rebuild afterwards. It's not the, that's with COVID. I mean, that was a great example. It was, COVID, it wasn't the, part of it was remember the press conference that really did do him in, where he said you have to let the light into the body.
I remember.
So,
yeah.
Second order effects.
So I think back into the guests you have on, if you think about the people from the Bulwark, if you think about, the old, country club Republicans who've been, I think, kicked out by the MAGA wing of the party that's taken over the party for the last 9-10 years. It's interesting to think back, and maybe I'm the only person asking about it, but there was this postmortem, an autopsy that came out after Mitt Romney lost in 2012. Mm-hmm. And had anybody gamed the chances that somebody could just come and tear it up and go for a different base or run the table on the Electoral College? And the fact that it's still working, and the fact that the economy is still functional, that the international markets are functional, the fact that you could do these surreal things such as the Maduro extraction and then still have normalcy on the following Monday morning still boggles my mind. And I always wonder if there's a copy of that autopsy floating around somewhere on eBay. Nobody seems to talk about it.
Well, why? And here's a question: why wasn't there a Democratic autopsy? Like, why do we never get to see that? Right? Like,
which is where I wanted to take it with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, so after 24 and listening to you and listening to the other people you brought on during the thing, and the party, who leads the party right now? Who would be the center of gravity for that? Is there full faith and confidence in the head of the Democratic Party and the DNC? There are a lot of people who doubt Hakeem Jeffries. There are a lot of people who think that Senator Chuck Schumer is long in the tooth. You've talked often, especially in the wake of your book and your memoir, about the gerontocracy in the system. Doesn't there have to be a locus of control a kind of a center of gravity for something like an autopsy to happen. And I know I mixed 3,000 metaphors there, but go ahead.
So the DNC chair decided not to release the autopsy. I don't know why. It's better to move on. My guess is that there are a couple of things that happened that went wrong. And so here's what I would say. You had a consultant class that made a big gamble that Never Trump was a bigger group than it was. That's number one. Now, I like a lot of those people a lot, but and some of them are my friends, but that was not a huge voting constituency. And in fact, they probably alienated a fair amount of Democrats with the Liz Cheneys. So the
espousing someone like a Liz Cheney, or
yeah.
I mean, would you consider, who's it, Stewart, the guy who has the beautiful voice who comes on your show, who was the Romney campaign chair?
Yeah.
Is he considered I think consultant class? Is he considered of a Liz Cheney
cloth? No, I think so. What I would say is I think the Liz Cheney events hurt her. I think they did not. They weren't. What she needed to do was focus more on bringing out her base, bringing out the people. Like again. I think that during the DNC, they should have had a Muslim speaker. I think they should have said, you don't have to necessarily address Israel and Palestine, though I think morally you should, but you certainly have to address Muslim voters. You absolutely do. You cannot not have a Muslim speaker at the DNC. You cannot, and that's what they didn't have that. You cannot skip out on parts of your base. You cannot. And that, I think we did see that. I also think that and this is not a Harris problem as much as it was a Biden problem, as much as it was a lot of these problems were things she inherited from him. I don't think they were, you can't, in 109 days, you're not making the campaign you're inheriting. But except the one problem which she didn't inherit from him was the innate sexism and racism of the voting of American voting public. That was something that she could not. That was like an immovable force. But one of the things that I think we saw from Biden world that was a mistake was they refused to embrace real populism. They were still, concerned about pleasing the Mark Cubans of the world and the Jeff Bezoses and the Elon Musks. They were still trying to make, and again, nobody is saying that it's not capitalism. We're just saying that some 80% of all Americans believe that billionaires are too involved in American politics, that they have too much influence and too much sway. Nobody wants wealthy people buying elections. That's an 80-20 issue. There's few people more unpopular than Elon Musk. And so the question is, why weren't Democrats running on that? And the answer is they were really scared of alienating the sort of Ubers of the world. And there was a lot of operating from a place of fear in Biden world, not having him out there all the time, not having him interview, not having him tweet, not having him interface with the voting public, whether or not that was, they were fearful. Were they fearful because he was just not a great speaker or because there was something wrong with him? I don't begin to know, but they were fearful. And that that anxiety really did undermine so much of his presidency and made it very hard for people to know what the fuck was going on in that administration.
Full disclosure, I'm Roben Farzad, our guest, and I love her show, Fast Politics with Molly Jong-Fast. This is, of course, Molly Jong-Fast, author of How to Lose Your Mother, which we'll discuss. She's now a contributing writer for the New York Times. Prolific byline. It's been everywhere. Gosh, you look it up. I'm Playboy. I'm excited. Does Playboy still come out in print?
No.
I ask my 7-year-old self. Anyway, I digress. Molly, who do you think is coagulating around what this party is going to become? Again, we had Spanberger on. You see this spat between Mark Kelly in Arizona and the Department of War and Pete Hegseth. Maybe they have isolated him as a contender. Clearly, the governor of California has mastered the podcast mic in a certain way. He's seemed fearless in how he's gone on Fox News. Or is it way, 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 way too early to tell?
Is it way too? It's way too early to tell. It's way too early to tell. I don't know what. I don't know.
I mean, just a face.
It looks
a face who leads the party.
So
I don't know.
Here's what I would say.
Not a speaker of the House, not a senator, not a DNC, not a civilian.
So Spanberger has been really effective. She won by a lot. Mikey Sherrill too. I think those two are really good prototype in certain ways because they are both women, national security moms who have these backgrounds that are very, national security, but they're also they come from a sort of resistance to Trumpism in 2018. That was when they were elected to the House.
And is that not the Liz Cheney school of thought? I mean, Liz Cheney came to the Richmond Forum and extolled Abigail Spanberger and won over a lot of the gray hairs with that.
Yeah, it's not. It's not, because the difference is Liz Cheney has an entire voting record of voting with Republicans. And she has her father, who's like the albatross to end all albatrosses when you think about Democratic politics, right? I mean, he was one of the, so I just think, no, I think she represents a lot to people that is not necessarily what Democratic politicians want. I think it's. I don't. I think she's. But
this I really wonder about. How do we explain a Bill Kristol, a Tim Miller? These were people who stumped for
them, and we think we like them, and we think they're smart, but they're not a good way to grow the base. The Republicans who are never Trump are now Democrats, and they'll even say that to you. The base, but you cannot, and this is a lesson that we have seen. We saw in 2016 and 2024. You can't if you cannot turn out the base, you can't win. Like if you alienate the left, you can't win. Now, am I saying you need to have purity? Absolutely not. But I am saying you have to run on popular ideas. You have to run with a populist message. I mean, look, I think Donald Trump won on a message that Democrats were actually trying to do. Right? I mean, Donald Trump said, I'm going to make things cheaper for you. That was why people voted for him. If you ask these people, they say, I voted for him because he said he was going to make things cheaper. Now, Democrats actually wanted to make things cheaper. I mean, if you look at the government shutdown, why did Democrats want the shutdown? Because they were worried about Obamacare premiums going up. That's things being cheaper. But the problem is they couldn't transmit that. And so Trump said, I'm going to make things cheaper. And voters went, oh, he's going to make things cheaper.
Before I pivot, Molly, I want to ask you, what do you make of Governor Beshear? What is a Governor Beshear? Someone in a ruby red state who maybe for peculiar reasons ends up winning the governorship there. Is that something that the party should try to ingest and transubstantiate and apply nationally?
Wait, say it again?
What is a Governor Beshear? How do you elect a Democrat? What is a Democrat elected in Kentucky, which is a ruby red state, which produced, Mitch McConnell and other people and is retrograde in many other respects and anathema to what the broader party represents?
I mean, I would say this. There are red states that elect blue governors, for sure. North Carolina is a red. I mean, North Carolina is more of a purple-ish state, but Kentucky, we saw this in Kansas. So we do see it. It's not Kansas governor is called. Now I'm losing. I think her name. Wait, I want to look at her name because
I forget the name. The stat I used to love to go out to lunch on, and I have to double check it. By the time Obama was sworn in 2009, I think the Dakotas, 3 out of 4 of the U.S. senators were Democrats, which seems unthinkable now.
Yeah. I mean, look, Laura Kelly in Kansas. Yeah. So, I mean, look, what happens is you have red states that do, that elect people who are so destructive that they end up pivoting to a Democrat. We saw this in Louisiana too. That's not an unusual phenomenon. That doesn't necessarily mean that the governor is super talented. Now, I think Beshear is excellent for any number of reasons, but it depends on the state. But having a Democratic governor doesn't necessarily, I mean, it's not as unusual as you would think. And I think that part of that is because governor's races are weirder like, for example, to get into Tim Walz dropping out in Minnesota, part of the reason why he dropped out of Minnesota is because I think the fraud case, though, a lot of it was prosecuted in 2022 and a lot of people did go to jail. I think that really did affect the polling, and he really did think he would not win a third term.
Molly, I have to ask you what the party, how the party is healing or coming together or stitching up after October 2023, namely Gaza, right? I was just in Florida visiting family. It's split apart. I think the Jewish vote in my community, the Iranians and the Iranian Jews, suddenly there's a whole really pro-Trump element of people who were Democrats in a past life. There's a real anathema to people. I mean, you've studied the Mandani phenomenon. We could say forever that it is really telling, whatever you think of the man, that 25 years after 9/11, the city has elected a Muslim mayor.
Yeah.
And not just a Muslim mayor, not just a sweep it under the rug Muslim, but openly Muslim, openly questioned Israel's entire mandate. This has caused no shortage of controversy, and it's spooked a bunch of people, I think, into, at best, apathy for whatever the Democratic Party can offer.
Well, I would say this, and I think it's worth this is worth talking to Elise Stefanik about. There was a lot of conventional wisdom which said Mondami is going to win, and he's going to hurt Democrats in New York, right? That was the conventional wisdom before the election. He was going to hurt Democrats in New York because Democrats, they could tie him to all sorts of, woo-woo Muslim stuff. But what happened, I think, with that Oval Office meeting where Trump was like, this guy's great. I don't know why Elise Stefanik thinks he's, a Muslim. He, in some ways, the Islamophobia that Republicans had really been just dining out on for such a long time was kind of dispelled by that weird Oval Office meeting.
There's a charm. He was on one of the bro comedic podcasts. I think, who's the other guy? It's not Bert Kreischer or something, and they're all laughing and yucking it up. Well, the mustache comedian with the slick back hair,
right?
Like you can volley the serve on something like that, as can a Gavin Newsom and a Donald Trump.
And the other thing, though, was that Trump then said, you had somebody asked, well, Elise Stefanik says this, he's 9/11, when he was 7. And Trump says, oh, yeah, but, she has to say that kind of racist stuff. That's kind of what we do. I mean, he didn't quite say he said she has to say this stuff. That it's just a campaign. So that did, in some ways, weirdly take down some of the anti-Mondami. Republicans couldn't run on it after Trump had been like, this guy's pretty cool. So again, I think mayor is a terrible job. I think New York City mayor is probably one of the worst political jobs you could ever have. I mean, there are maybe a few jobs worse, but there's never been a New York City mayor who has gone on to do anything but cower back into public life. So do I feel good about this really successful, young, really charismatic politician who has been able to connect with voters in a way that many of us have been begging Democratic electeds to connect with voters for years and years and years? Going into a job that's basically a meat grinder? No, because I just don't know how you survive that job. And if he can do 8 years of it and he can have, come out of it seeming at all like a person and with any level of success, then for sure he can be president. He can't be president because he wasn't born in this country, but he can be whatever. But it's just it's a tough road to walk.
Full disclosure, stay with us. The show podcast to NPR, Spotify. You can watch it all on YouTube. All of the podcatchers, Apple. Shout out to our radio listeners on WVTF, Radio IQ. That's Virginia's NPR news source. We are on WPVM in Asheville, North Carolina. You could catch us, out west on KPPQ. Holler if you would like to have us on your air. And of course, I post all of these episodes in video, in audio. Heck, I'll burn a CD for you at fulldradio.com. Again, fulldradio.com, and just message me. My DMs are always open. If you're just joining us, and I'm so stoked for this one, our guest is Molly Jong-Fast. She's author of How to Lose Your Mother and various other books. I mean, fiction, nonfiction. She's host of the hit pod, which I listen to religiously, Fast Politics, which is on the iHeartMedia network, correct? And then contributing writer with the New York Times. I do want to get to that book, How to Lose Your Mother. And this is where I'll leave the gap. Ian, let's run an excerpt in her voice. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You were listening to some of Molly Jong-Fast's bestseller, How to Lose Your Mother. That very quickly escalated above the New York Times bestseller list. And I have to tell you that I toggled between the hardcover and listening to it in your voice, because being so familiar with your voice on the pod, I mean, it would hit especially hard, but I could only take it in so many injections, because there's real authenticity and pain in your voice in putting this all out there. Your mother is in the throes of dementia. Your mother was a feminist rock star in the early 70s. The fact that you've become this whole different generational rock star 50 years after that, doing this out of your apartment with a podcast mic, going up and down to Rockefeller Center, appearing on Morning Joe and everything, and all the various things that you wish you could have said to your mother with open arms and an open heart that are in this book. And I'm just wondering about the range of reactions you got to it. It must not have been easy at all to put that all out there.
Yeah, it wasn't as bad as you'd think, but it was very annoying. I mean, I don't love talking about myself. I'm not super interested in I don't like talking about myself. I don't like having to deal with, I'm really careful about my family and writing about them and talking about them. I don't like it. So it wasn't great, but it wasn't as bad as, there wasn't a ton. What I was worried about were people just like the Daily Mail wrote this whole thing about how I was going to trash my family. And then when the book came out, the reviews were pretty nice. So there was some, it wasn't meant to be a sort of like trashing my mother or it was meant to be sort of a book about what does it mean to have this terrible year of your life. And I'm not sure how.
And in that terrible year with loved ones dying, broken bones, emergency calls with your husband, you've been open about this, getting the scariest of cancer diagnoses. I remember this because it was during my cancer ordeal, and we were sharing notes behind the scenes on this and the cancer protocol and where you're getting treated and everything. To hear pancreatic cancer, right?
Yeah.
It's the one, that and the glioblastoma are the ones to end all things. And in the book, the fact that you guys looked at each other and said that, do we have any choice but to just keep moving?
Yeah. And I mean, that I think is really true. So, and that's why I wanted to write about it, was this idea that you couldn't, that like, how do you go on from that? How do you live that way? What happens? How do you survive that kind of diagnosis? What do you do next? And that I was really glad to get to write about that. And I really had always loved Didion, and I had always I had really loved Your Magical Thinking, and I had felt like there was a real place for that kind of memoir of the worst year of your life. And so I definitely was glad to get to write about that.
I don't see how you're so functional about it. I remember that scene where you're going down to Midtown or something for a CNN hit and you're on the phone with your dad. And there's just kind of this understanding that, do I remember it correctly that your mom kind of went out of her way to not make plans with you as a little kid? This kind of stuff came out in drip, 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 as everybody is in active grief and in mourning. And you throughout are very functional, right? You're running the pod. You are on TV. You are keeping it together so well. I know this is this shadow and persona going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how it has to be, right? I think you have to just keep going. That's what, you had the same experience. You just have to keep going as much as you can. It's not much fun, but you have to do it. And that's, there aren't other choices.
Molly, I have to ask you, and that I don't want to devolve into becoming so meta that we end up resembling a New Yorker cartoon with people talking to a Freudian on some old, Ottoman couch. But in both of our cases, right, you descend from the Eastern European and the European tribes. And I'm from literally my grandfather was an illiterate merchant in Iran. And there was various trauma. We fled. There was a pogrom in my city in 1910. There was my grandfather saw many of his brothers carried out dead. He survived the Spanish flu coming out of that. No shortage of anti-Semitism that my father and his uncles experienced. It's a big reason why we came here during the revolution. And a lot of that, and again, I sometimes hesitate to use the word trauma because it's overused today, but that was sublimated and transmogrified into everything else that I have done in my life and being a very functional person who traffics in the English language. And I can't help but think about your very esteemed ancestors and what they fled. And also the irony of your grandpa won the Stalin medal. I mean, many have written about this, in that a lot of that is just absolute unresolved, unaddressed, untherapized trauma from other generations that gets passed on to the children and the progeny.
Yeah. Okay. So here's what I would say.
I don't know if I went anywhere with that, but I'm trying to enunciate it somehow.
No, I mean, look, I think, is there a collective anxiety when you are, my family came over after the 1800 pogroms, before the Holocaust. They came from Ukraine and Poland and Russia. I think that certainly there's like a real tradition of storytelling of, I come from a family
of vodka and credit merit, to be honest, right?
Vaudeville and vodka.
And
so, yes, vaudeville and vodka. And I think that's, as someone who comes from vaudeville and vodka, I think it's traumatic, but I also think that like that anxiety is also helpful, right? The people who came over were the people who were anxious. The people who stayed are the people who are dead.
When did you first realize, and again, it's quoted from the book, but when did you first realize that you were unhappy or that this wasn't a happy childhood? Or did you think, looking around, that it was other people in Connecticut or the Upper East Side who just lived like this? This is the way life was.
I think that I always think, like, when I write about politics, one of the reasons why I have instincts that sometimes I don't necessarily trust because of the way I grew up. And so I always am sort of looking at things in multiple ways to try to figure out if I'm really seeing things clearly. And I understand I see how much my own thought process is influenced by my own peccadillos, by the way that I grew up, by the things that I see. It's funny. I'm reading this book my grandfather wrote, and he's talking about how he no longer has faith in his own objectivity. And I think that's so important when we're talking about writing and politics and what gets put in there and what doesn't, and what sort of what objectivity looks like.
I have to tell you, in reading this and that body work, when I read it several times, and I listened to bits back and forth toggling on audiobook. I was thinking about Mary Trump and discussions
Yeah.
of her family and the way Fred Trump, I think Jr., was cast out, and um, the sheer loneliness and dysfunction in that family, how he himself, Donald Trump, was raised, how there was a sublimation, I think, in achievement and just being aggressive and winning, while this other brother was cast out. And yet the guy remains a teetotaler well into, his 70s and early 80s. I'm sure that you've been reminded of other books. Is Jeanette, was it the book is I'm Glad My Mother's Dead, right? And moreover, I think of, there was another book, Minka Kelly, the actress, who came out
Mm-hmm.
with this memoir. And I was shocked in seeing that someone that was so polished, so shiny and everything had survived really a masochistic childhood. I mean, her mother's boyfriends were beating her, were raping her, that she
Yeah.
had covered all this stuff. But to bring it all back to you is in your dialogue with your mother, which is impossible now because she's there, but she's not there, right? Um, how do we even define grace? How do we even define, like, I know I can't sanction what she did. I cannot sanction the neglect or the narcissism, but I can see how it came together, and moreover, I can prevent it from continuing on with my kids.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. I think that's right. But, I think there's a real question about how. Um, I think that there's a real question about how we sort of look at our own childhoods, how we pull back from the kind of addiction, narrative, and how we get some sort of clarity about our own lives with our parents.
I mean, the first introduction to alcohol, my impression was like, oh, look, she's finishing off drinks at the party. She's being a little old soul and everything. Illustrate for our listeners how that devolved into, rehab and you ending your teens, and a journey that you continuously mark on social media. The fact that you're always present, that's always
Yeah.
such a hinge moment in your life. Unpack that for us.
So I got sober when I was 19, and I've been sober 28 years. And I did, and I really, I just knew I had to do it, and I think it changed the course of my whole life, and it was really good because it set up my kids didn't have to watch my alcoholism. My mother's alcoholism uh, had been such a, my mother's alcoholism had been such a big part of my life and such a big part of my story. And um, this was how it was. And so getting sober was kind of important and meaningful and really did change the trajectory.
And the frustration in this book is how much you longed for a come to Jesus talk with your mom,
Mm-hmm.
and how elusive that was. And in many cases, it's become too late, that maybe even later in life when she realized where you are, maybe if a person with narcissistic tendencies is available, is even, I mean, I could say from experience, is like, oh, go ahead and insult me. Go ahead. You all put it on me. It's me. I'm the ones who made your life so miserable. Instead of the histrionics there, just the reading this, longing for that little aperture where you could sit together and have a candid talk about this. And you say, do you know, this hurt me? Do you know this bruised me when you did this, when you said this, when you didn't do this, when you couldn't spend time with me, when this had happened? And I think in your book, there is a universal longing for that. I think so many other people who read it, who promoted it, said, read this and see that you are not alone. I mean, in dealing
Right.
with, I mean, do we throw narcissism around a lot in this generation? Is this overdiagnosed?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we do, but I also think that I think that's true, but I also think that um, this narcissism is fine. I mean, narcissism is not, I don't know that narcissism is technically, there are a lot of narcissists who go on to be okay. I mean, they're maybe not the best to live around, but I mean, I think for my story, what I think was the problem was the high functioning alcoholism, and that is, that legacy ended with me.
Hmm. And what was that hinge moment for you, the intervention moment? Was it going to rehab? I mean, for people who've yet to read the book, I mean, there was a moment, I call it in our show the inception moment, where you'd realized, gosh, I can either continue down this road or I need to make a clean break from this somehow. And again, the 20-year-old brain is not fully formed. I mean, I keep having
Right.
these conversations with myself in college where I was a stranger in a strange land among a lot of
Right.
blue bloods. It's like, why didn't you have the courage of your convictions? Why didn't you have more confidence? And then the doctor will say, Farzad, you were 20. Chill the heck
Right.
out. Give yourself grace.
Right.
Go ahead. By the way, I can give you a psych copay for this appearance, Molly.
So I don't know. The answer is I don't know. I mean, I definitely felt like I definitely think there was a sense I think I don't know. The answer is I don't know. I definitely, I'm just glad I made it out of that childhood. It was not a good one, but it was not fun. I did not have a good fun childhood.
But you're not, but again, you're now able to have conversations with your kids. They're not all or nothing, kind of like, every teenager or 20 something wants to say, I hate you or this or this, but at least they'll comment. It's not an all or nothing thing. Like, you know what, mom, maybe you could have said this. Maybe I wanted to hear it this way, which is something
right.
reading in the book that it was completely, your mother was absolutely incapable of having that breadth of relationship with you.
Yeah. But, worse things have happened to better people, and it was not like I was, there are many worse stories. It's more of a question of like, I wanted to write this story because I thought it would help people deal with having parents who had dementia, who were unable to connect, who and how you sort of survive that situation.
It absolutely did, if I may break the fourth wall in saying that. Full
Yes.
disclosure,
Oh, thank
I'm Roben
you.
Farzad. We're joined by Molly Jong-Fast. I'm a huge fan. Fast Politics is her podcast, her hit podcast on the iHeart Radio Podcast Network. She's a contributing writer to the New York Times, and we're discussing her best-selling memoir, How to Lose Your Mother. Molly, in the 10 minutes or so we have left, I want to talk about Molly Jong-Fast Corp., which is something that is very topical. We've had many guests on talking about the breaking to bits of legacy media. Clearly, what was MSNBC formerly, where you're a
Yeah.
regular, you're a fixture, you're almost
I'm a
synonymous.
contributing editor.
Yeah, with Morning Joe, that's now MS
Yeah.
Now. It was spun off
Yes.
from the
Yes.
Peacock and the mothership. It's Versant Media, which has kind of struggled in its first few days as an IPO. But I say this because I came to you as a kind of a business story initially. You set this up with a podcast mic in your place on the Upper East Side with your little canine right by you, and you had that voice, you pushed that voice by force of will out into the ether. And here we are, a pandemic and continued media disintermediation later. And I would argue that you're more valuable to legacy media than vice versa.
I don't know.
I mean, look how it's happened in sports with Pat McAfee. Pat McAfee. Look how ESPN has had to go to YouTube stars. Look at the breadth of people who listen to you. I mean, Elizabeth Warren comes on your show. These people listen to you. I've gone on your show and I've heard from people I had no idea would listen to something like that. And it used to be the primacy of an MSNBC Mornings or an NBC News or a Meet the Press. But I think of you. I think of the Bulwark. I think of other people who've really, they're kind of pioneers. They've pounced on this opportunity at a time of just pure disruption.
Yeah. I mean, look, I wish that we still had a functioning mainstream media more than anyone, probably. And it's because I think that reporting is so critical. And I don't think that a million people with microphones do the same kind of work that a team of reporters do. And I think that part of a lot of the problems we're having at this moment are because we do not have the kind of staffs of reporters that we desperately need. We're not seeing reporting from the corruption. We're not seeing reporting out of what happened with Doge. We're not seeing, we see what they did. We see the New York Times has, shows that it's not the way that, that a lot of that stuff is not adding up, right? That the wall of receipts was riddled with errors, but we're not seeing like TikToks of like what big balls did in those federal agencies, and that's because we just don't have the kind of manpower. We don't have the kind of reporting that's needed. So it's nice to have people like you or I doing podcasts. I think it's good. I think it's healthy. I think it helps people, but it's not the same. And the truth is, I'm not in a position where I could do it, but if if I would rather have a number of newspapers that were doing real reporting and have a number of, we have basically one newspaper, right? The New York Times. I mean,
You have the
that's
Wall Street Journal,
insane.
which is backstopped by a 90-something billionaire who's maybe on his, maybe he's in the waiting room right now and nobody
Right.
knows what happens after that.
Right. And so we don't have much in the way of newspapers. We don't have much in the way of television news. We don't have, the public broadcasting is now no longer. I mean, it's an emergency
It's
for
a true emergency,
reporting.
but this is the thing that's, people were applauding when Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post. He was asked to buy the Washington Post. I mean, $200 million is a pittance to a man now worth, hundreds of billions of dollars. But he even tired of absorbing those losses. And he even tired of it having cross-contaminate his other businesses, rockets, cloud, intelligence adjacent stuff. So you've seen a far more conciliatory posture toward an administration, which clearly, as you've covered, is transactional, which is vindictive, and others there. I mean, how out of the billionaire backstop, I don't want to get into the inside baseball of this. You're a contributing writer now for the New York Times. The New York Times might have been the only ones, sans billionaire, but they did have a family share of stock that was able to innovate into digital and get people to pay and pay dearly for the digital product. Wall Street Journal, they kind of do that from a B2B perspective. The Washington Post has cut back on that. We saw CBS News is not as much of a priority under, with Barry Weiss now running it, and that the Paramount bid that, the way the Ellison family of Oracle fame came in to do it, and they want to snap up CNN and its entire parent Warner Brothers Discovery too.
Yeah.
It's bleak in that there's no business model. At the same time, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is gone. And so a bunch of stations across the country are imperiled by this. And it's a system of, you pay for a login and you have access, or you don't. And you go
Yeah.
for all the free stuff that's of questionable quality, but plentiful quantity.
Yeah. I think that's right. And so I don't know the answer. I do not know the answer. And I don't feel good about where we are. And even if my own success is somehow related to that, I don't feel good about it. And I really worry.
So you see someone like a Heather Cox Richardson you've had on your show documenting all of this step by step, day by day, tick by talk, right? That you lament the fact that there aren't people out there covering the Doge cuts or the how that happened and everything. The bleak question is, what does it matter if people are tuning this stuff out? That's the post-apocalyptic question that I have that keeps me up at night. I talk to my son and the high schoolers and the way they consume news, if they consume news at all. They don't know that I do CNN appearances. They don't read the New York Times or the Washington Post. They get it from short form vertical video. This just seems to be accelerating.
Yeah. No, I think that's what I think we're all worried about, is that it does seem to be accelerating. And, admit they could have legislated their way out of this. They could have created a fact check for things. Even community notes which is Elon Musk actually does create some kind of fact check, but that's not what's happening here. Like,
Molly,
there's no backstop there. Yeah, go on.
Close us out. This is one of the more difficult interviews. I'll be candid in full disclosure for me, because I felt it, and I so took the book to heart. And I feel like I don't say it's an omniscience, but I so have feasted on your voice. I've used it for long drives. I love it. Monday mornings in the Fast Politics. There's no shortage of me privately and publicly back when I was on Twitter X, blowing these kisses at you. Close us out with something that, could be non sequitur, could be the barking behind the scenes that I hear. How would you like to close this out? It's hard. It's hard, I will say, doing this with someone you admire and who does it well. And it's a little bit like shadow boxing. Like, I'm not as easy as,
I'm just delighted to get to be with you. I'm such a fan of yours, and I'm so happy that I get to have my dogs be a menace during your show.
It is full disclosure. Are you kvetching or kvelling? Can you separate that?
I'm kvelling. I am not kvetching. I am kvelling. I am very much kvelling. So I'm delighted to be
Well, go ahead and close us out. Put any kind of bonbon you can on
it. Just that everyone should read reporting in ProPublica, in the Washington Post, in the New York Times, and in the Wall Street Journal. And we should all support public radio, because it is the only thing keeping us from really being in a kleptocracy.
Molly Jong-Fast, author of the bestseller How to Lose Your Mother, which I cannot rave about enough, host of the hit podcast Fast Politics, which hits and drops onto your Spotify or wherever you get your pods, like so many delicious, crunchy onion rings, best had with barbecue sauce. But I digress. And of course, contributing writer for the New York Times. You, of course, are always welcome on this show. I love hearing from you. I know you are spread thin and everybody's asking you to be on their program, but love to see you in person too. So put that on your 26 calendar, hopefully.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. You're the best.
You're the best. It was hard for me to do.
You were great.